You don't have the right to lock us out of our own neighborhood.
That's what Diane Wexler screamed at me through a bullhorn while standing on my property 10 feet past my fence line, in front of 30 witnesses being recorded by cameras she didn't know were running. She had organized the community safety, really no code or key, over to protest the fact that I had installed a biometric security gate on my own private driveway. A gate with no key, no keyhole, no code, nothing she could demand, copy, or send someone to cut in the middle of the night, which, by the way, she had already done twice with my old padlocks. She thought she was making a statement. What she was actually doing was committing criminal trespass on camera in front of a newspaper photographer she hadn't noticed, parked on the county road behind her. Have you ever watched someone build their own case against themselves? Tell me below. So, would you have stopped her or let her keep walking? My name is Curtis Bain. I'm 47 years old, and I work as a cybersecurity consultant out of Asheville, North Carolina. Before that,
I spent 12 years in the Air Force, working signals intelligence and electronic security systems. I know locks. I know access control. I know how to keep people out of places they don't belong, and I know how to document every single attempt they make to get in. My father, Earl Bain, bought 26 acres on the western slope of Pisgah Ridge back in 1989. Dense hardwood forest, oak, hickory, poplar, with a seasonal creek running through the northeast corner and a gravel access road that connects to County Route 9. He built a cabin there in 1991. Nothing fancy. 1,200 square feet of post and beam construction with a metal roof, a stone fireplace, a wraparound porch, and a view of the Smokies that would stop your heart on a clear morning. He used that cabin every weekend for 25 years, hunted deer from it in the fall, fished the creek in spring, sat on the porch in summer, and read Louis L'Amour novels until the lightning bugs came out. When the Ridgecrest Meadows subdivision went in around 2008, the developer bought 100 acres east of Dad's property and carved it into 62 residential lots. Cookie-cutter houses on half-acre parcels, community pool, walking trail, the whole suburban package. The HOA was formed the same year. Dad's land was never part of the subdivision, never part of the HOA. The properties shared a boundary line, about 400 feet of split-rail fence along the eastern edge, and that was the extent of the relationship. Dad passed in 2016 from pancreatic cancer. I inherited the property free and clear. The cabin became my retreat, my decompression chamber after long consulting contracts. I drive up on Friday afternoons, turn off my phone, and spend 2 days doing nothing but splitting wood, grilling steaks, and sitting on the porch watching the ridge change color. Diane Wexler moved into Ridgecrest Meadows in 2019. She was 54, divorced, originally from Charlotte, and had the kind of energy that fills a room, the way a smoke alarm fills a hallway. She ran for HOA president within 3 months of moving in, and won unopposed, because nobody else wanted the job. That should tell you everything. Within 6 months, she had rewritten the landscaping guidelines, hired a new management company, and started sending violation notices to homeowners about mailbox height, fence stain color, and whether basketball hoops were architecturally compatible. The first time I met her was at a community yard sale that spilled over onto the road near my property line. She walked up my driveway uninvited, knocked on my cabin door, and introduced herself as though she were presenting credentials at an embassy. She told me my gravel driveway was visually inconsistent with the neighborhood aesthetic, and asked if I'd consider paving it. I told her my property wasn't part of her neighborhood. She smiled the way a cat smiles at a mouse it hasn't decided to chase yet, and said, "Well, we're all neighbors here, aren't we?" I should have recognized that smile for what it was, a declaration of intent. The trouble started with the gate. My property has a single access point from County Route 9, a gravel road that runs about 300 yards through the trees to the cabin. Dad had installed a basic tube gate at the entrance with a padlock. more to keep ATVs out than anything else. It had been there since the 90s. Nobody had ever complained about it. In March of 2022, I got a letter from the Ridgecrest Meadows HOA on official letterhead signed by Diane Wexler, informing me that my gate impedes emergency access to the surrounding community, and that I was required to provide the HOA with a key to the padlock within 30 days. The letter cited something called the Ridgecrest Community Safety Initiative and referenced a section of the HOA bylaws about emergency preparedness and access coordination. I read it twice. Then I checked my property records. My land was not part of Ridgecrest Meadows. My gate was on my property. The gravel road behind it led exclusively to my cabin. There was no public easement, no shared access, no emergency route that ran through my land. The nearest fire hydrant was half a mile away on the subdivision's internal road. My gate impeded nothing except uninvited visitors. I wrote back a polite letter explaining that my property was private, not subject to HOA governance, and that no key would be provided. I included a copy of my deed and a survey map showing the property boundaries. 2 weeks later, I got a second letter. This one was less polite. It stated that the HOA board had voted to classify my gate as a community safety obstruction, and that failure to provide a key within 15 days would result in fines and corrective action. The fine was $300. I didn't respond to the second letter. I pinned it to my refrigerator and went fishing. The following Saturday, I drove up to the cabin and found my padlock had been cut. Clean bolt cutter job. The lock was on the ground, the gate was open, and there were fresh tire tracks on my road. I checked the trail camera I keep mounted on a pine tree near the gate. Standard practice. I'd had cameras running since 2018, and found footage from the previous Wednesday showing a white pickup truck pulling up to the gate at 2:47 p.m. A man got out, cut the lock, swung the gate open, and drove through. He came back out 11 minutes later. The truck had no plates visible from the camera angle, but I could see a Ridgecrest Meadows parking sticker on the rear window. I replaced the padlock with a heavier one. Hardened steel shackle, anti-cut design, pick-resistant core. I also added a second trail camera at a different angle to catch plates. The following Wednesday, the new lock was cut too. Same bolt cutters, same clean job. This time the camera caught the plate. The truck was registered to a man named Glenn Furlow, who I later learned was the HOA's contracted maintenance supervisor. My camera also caught something else. Diane Wexler's silver Lexus pulling up behind the truck, waiting at the road while Furlow did the cutting, then driving through the open gate behind him. She was inside the gate for 22 minutes. I sat on my porch that evening looking at the footage on my laptop. The sun was setting behind Pisgah Ridge, painting the sky in shades of copper and violet. The air smelled like pine resin and wood smoke from someone's chimney down the valley. I listened to the creek running through the trees and thought about the fact that a woman I barely knew had just paid someone to cut my lock, twice, and driven onto my land like she owned it. I didn't call the sheriff that night. I should have. But I was still thinking like someone who believed this could be resolved with reason. That was about to change. The next week, I installed a proper gate. Not the tube gate Dad had put up, a real security gate. 6-foot welded steel frame with a reinforced crossbar, set in concrete footings, with a commercial-grade padlock rated for bolt cutter resistance. I also welded a steel plate over the shackle so you couldn't get cutters around it without an angle grinder. Cost me about $2,000 in materials and a full Saturday of work. I mounted 2 additional cameras, one aimed at the gate from the front, one from a tree about 30 feet back covering the entire approach. All solar-powered, all uploading to cloud storage. 3 days after the new gate went in, I got a knock on the door of my house in Asheville. Not the cabin, my primary residence. A Buncombe County Sheriff's deputy stood on my front porch with a complaint report. Diane Wexler had filed a formal complaint alleging that I had installed an unauthorized security barrier on a shared access road and that the installation constituted a public safety hazard and obstruction of emergency services. The deputy was a young guy, maybe 25, clearly uncomfortable. He said he was obligated to investigate the complaint and asked if I'd be willing to discuss the situation. I invited him in, showed him the deed, the survey, the trail camera footage of Furlow cutting my locks, and explained that the gate was on private property with no public easement. He took notes, thanked me, and left. The complaint was closed the same day. No violation. But Diane wasn't finished. She had discovered something that gave her a new angle of attack. The gravel access road from County Route 9 to my cabin ran along the western edge of my property. There was a short section, about 60 feet, where the road came within 12 feet of the Ridgecrest Meadows property boundary. This section ran alongside Lot 62, the last lot in the subdivision, which happened to be a common area maintained by the HOA. Diane seized on this proximity and began arguing that my road constituted a shared boundary access corridor that fell under the HOA's jurisdiction. She hired a surveyor. His name was Keith something. I never got the last name. He placed survey stakes along the boundary line near Lot 62 and sent a report to Diane claiming that a 3-foot strip of my road might encroach on the HOA common area. I say might because the report used the phrase, "within the margin of measurement uncertainty." In surveying, that means the surveyor isn't sure. It's the equivalent of a doctor saying, could be a bruise, could be something else, and Diane treating it like a confirmed diagnosis. She took that report and sent a letter to the county road department, the fire marshal, and the county planning office, alleging that my gate was blocking a shared access corridor and requesting an emergency review. She CC'd me on all 3 letters. I read them sitting at my kitchen table in Asheville, eating leftover chili. My blood pressure was normal. My response was going to be devastating. I hired my own surveyor, a licensed professional land surveyor named Richard Goss, who had 32 years of experience and whose name carried weight in every county office in western North Carolina. Richard came out, did a full boundary survey with GPS-verified monuments, and produced a certified plat that showed, beyond any doubt, that my road was entirely on my property, not close to the line, not within a margin of uncertainty. The nearest point of my road to the HOA boundary was 14.3 feet, well within my property and well outside any legitimate encroachment claim. Richard also reviewed Keith's survey and noted, in his professional opinion, that the stakes had been placed using outdated reference points, and that the methodology was inconsistent with current NCBELS standards. In plain English, Diane's surveyor had done sloppy work, probably because he was being paid to find what Diane wanted him to find, rather than what was actually there. I sent Richard's survey to all 3 agencies Diane had contacted, the road department, the fire marshal, and the planning office, with a cover letter from my attorney. Each agency closed their file within 2 weeks. The fire marshal actually called me to apologize for the inconvenience and said the complaint had no factual basis. But I wasn't just playing defense anymore. I was watching the pattern: lock cutting, false complaints, fraudulent survey work, harassment of government agencies. This wasn't a neighbor with a concern. This was a campaign. In June, Diane escalated from paperwork to politics. She called a special HOA meeting and placed a single item on the agenda: a vote to authorize the HOA to pursue legal action against me for obstruction of community access and refusal to comply with safety coordination requests. She presented it as a matter of public safety, arguing that if there were ever a fire, a medical emergency, or a natural disaster affecting the western boundary of the subdivision, my locked gate would prevent first responders from using my road as an alternate access route. This was, of course, nonsense. The subdivision had 2 dedicated entrances on the east and south sides, both connected to county roads, both meeting all fire code requirements. My private road on the western boundary was never designed, designated, or required as an emergency route. The county fire marshal had already confirmed this, but Diane presented the issue with the kind of theatrical urgency that makes people vote with their stomachs instead of their brains. The vote passed 41-9. 9 people had the sense to ask questions. 41 people trusted Diane when she said the HOA's attorney had confirmed they had strong legal grounds. The HOA's attorney was a man named Paul Dietrich, who worked out of a strip mall office in Hendersonville and mostly handled lease disputes and small business formations. He sent me a 4-page letter demanding that I remove my gate, provide the HOA with emergency access credentials, and pay a combined fine of $2,200 for ongoing non-compliance with community safety standards. The letter cited 3 statutes. 2 of them applied exclusively to commercial properties. The third was a fire code regulation that specifically exempted private residential roads with no public access designation. Dietrich had either not read the statutes he was citing or had read them and didn't understand them. Either way, it was embarrassing. I didn't respond to Dietrich's letter. I forwarded it to my attorney, Helen Sharp. Helen was a property rights litigator out of Asheville with 25 years of experience in HOA disputes, easement claims, and land use conflicts. She had argued cases before the North Carolina Court of Appeals and had a reputation for being polite, precise, and ruthless in exactly that order. Helen sent back a 9-page response. She dismantled every claim in Dietrich's letter, cited the relevant North Carolina statutes on private property rights and HOA jurisdictional limits, attached my certified survey, the fire marshal's clearance letter, and the sheriff's report closing Diane's original complaint. She also included a paragraph noting that the HOA's continued assertion of authority over non-member property, combined with documented acts of lock cutting and trespass, could expose the HOA board to personal liability under North Carolina tort law. Dietrich responded with a 1-paragraph letter, saying the HOA was reviewing its options. That's attorney speak for, my client isn't going to listen to me, but I'm not putting my name on anything else. But Helen's letter did something I hadn't expected. It scared the insurance company. The HOA's liability carrier, a regional firm that insured about 40 HOAs in western North Carolina, received a copy of Helen's letter through standard disclosure procedures. They launched their own review. 2 weeks later, the carrier sent a letter to the Ridgecrest Meadows board, informing them that continued pursuit of claims against the non-member property owner, in the face of clear evidence of jurisdictional overreach, could jeopardize the HOA's coverage. They recommended the board discontinue all actions related to the Bain property immediately. Diane ignored the letter. She told the board the insurance company was overcautious and that she had other avenues to resolve the situation. I found this out because a board member named Connie Pruitt, a retired school teacher who lived on Lot 23 and had been growing increasingly uncomfortable with Diane's leadership, quietly called Helen's office and asked to speak with her off the record. Connie told Helen that Diane had dismissed the insurance warning in a closed board session and that at least 2 other board members had objected but been overruled. Connie said she was afraid of what Diane would do next. She was right to be afraid, because what Diane did next was call the police on me for the 2nd time. The 2nd police call came on a Saturday in July. I was at the cabin, installing a motion-activated floodlight above the new gate, when a sheriff's cruiser came down County Route 9 and stopped at my entrance. Same young deputy from before. He looked even more uncomfortable this time. He said Diane Wexler had filed a complaint alleging that I was fortifying my property in a threatening manner intended to intimidate neighboring residents. She had attached photographs, taken from her side of the boundary fence, showing my new gate, the cameras, and the floodlight. She described them in her complaint as paramilitary-grade security measures inconsistent with a residential setting. The deputy asked if he could look at the gate. I said sure. He looked at it. He He looked at the cameras. He looked at the floodlight. He said, "This looks like a regular security setup to me." He closed the complaint on site. Before he left, he said, and I'll never forget this, "Sir, between you and me, we've had 4 complaints from this woman in the past 3 months, all unfounded. My sergeant is starting to notice." I thanked him and finished installing the floodlight. But something had shifted in my thinking. This wasn't going to end with gates and locks and surveys. Diane wasn't going to stop because she was wrong. She was going to stop when she couldn't physically get past what I put in front of her and couldn't politically survive what I put behind her. That evening, I sat on the cabin porch with a cold beer and my laptop. The ridge was turning purple in the last light. The creek was running low from the summer heat, making a soft, ticking sound over the rocks. I opened a browser and started researching access control systems. Not residential locks, not padlocks, not hardware store deadbolts. I was looking at commercial-grade, electronic, biometric, and network-monitored access control. The kind of systems I'd worked with in the military. The kind that logs every attempt, photographs every visitor, and sends real-time alerts to your phone. The kind that doesn't have a key for anyone to demand, copy, or cut. I found what I was looking for in about 2 hours, and when I saw the specifications, I knew Diane Wexler had just run into a wall she couldn't climb, cut, vote on, or complain her way through. I ordered the components that night. I spent the next 3 weeks building a security system that would make a government contractor nod in approval. First, the gate. I replaced the welded steel frame with a motorized sliding gate, a 12-foot commercial-grade cantilever gate with a reinforced steel frame, anti-climb design, and no exposed locking mechanism. No padlock, no keyhole, no shackle to cut. The gate operated on a sealed electric motor, powered by a dedicated solar panel and battery bank. It opened and closed via encrypted radio signal from a fob I carried, or through a smartphone app that required biometric authentication, my fingerprint or facial recognition. There was no physical key, no code box, no combination, nothing Diane could demand, copy, or send a maintenance man to cut. Second, the access control panel. I mounted a hardened steel panel at the gate entrance with an intercom, a high-resolution camera, and a license plate recognition system. Any vehicle that approached the gate was automatically photographed, its plate logged and time-stamped, and the image uploaded to my cloud server in real time. If someone pressed the intercom button, I could see them, speak to them, and decide whether to open the gate, all from my phone, anywhere in the world. If I didn't answer, the gate stayed closed. Period. Third, the perimeter. I installed a continuous fence line monitoring system along the 400-foot boundary shared with Ridgecrest Meadows. Vibration sensors on the fence posts, infrared motion detectors in the tree line, and 4 additional cameras covering the boundary from multiple angles. Everything solar-powered, everything uploading to the cloud, everything time-stamped and GPS tagged. Fourth, and this was the piece that would matter most, I installed a comprehensive logging system that recorded every access event, every motion trigger, every intercom press, and every license plate in a tamper-proof database with automatic backups. Every time someone approached my gate, touched my fence, or walked within 20 feet of my boundary, I would know about it. I would have video, I would have a timestamp, and I would have it forever. I also did something I'd been putting off. I filed a formal criminal trespass complaint with the Buncombe County Sheriff's Office against Glenn Furlow for the 2 lock-cutting incidents in March. I attached the trail camera footage, the before and after photos of the cut locks, and the license plate capture showing Furlow's truck and Diane's Lexus. Helen Sharp sent a companion letter putting the HOA on notice that any future unauthorized entry onto my property would result in immediate civil action against the HOA, its officers, and any contracted agents personally. The sheriff's office assigned a detective, a solid guy named Bill Tatum, who'd been in property crimes for 15 years. He reviewed the footage, interviewed Furlow, and confirmed that Furlow had been acting on Diane Wexler's direct instructions. Furlow was cooperative. He gave a signed statement saying Diane had told him the gate was on community-adjacent land and that the HOA had authority to maintain access. He said she'd provided the bolt cutters. He said he didn't know the road was private property. Detective Tatum told me charges were being prepared against Furlow for criminal trespass and against Diane as the directing party, under North Carolina's accessory liability statute. The charges would take a few weeks to process through the DA's office. I didn't tell anyone. I just kept building. The last thing I installed was a polished aluminum sign mounted on the gate, laser engraved in capital letters. Private property, no keys, no codes, no exceptions, biometric access only, all approaches recorded and logged. I stood back and looked at it. The gate gleamed in the afternoon sun. The cameras blinked their quiet red LEDs. The solar panels tilted toward the light. The whole system hummed with the low, patient energy of something that would never sleep, never blink, and never hand Diane Wexler a single thing she could use. Granddad would have called it overbuilt. Helen called it bulletproof. I called it done. Diane discovered the new gate on a Monday. I know this because my system logged it. At 10:17 a.m., the license plate reader captured her silver Lexus approaching the gate from County Route 9. She sat there for 43 seconds. I have the video. Staring at the gate, the sign, the camera looking back at her. Then she pressed the intercom button. I was in Asheville at my desk. My phone buzzed. I looked at the live feed. Diane in her sunglasses, mouth set in a thin line, and I let it ring. She pressed it 4 more times over the next 2 minutes. Then she got out of her car, walked up to the gate and examined it. She ran her hand along the frame. She looked at the locking mechanism, or rather, looked for a locking mechanism and found none. She crouched down and looked at the bottom rail. She stood back up, took a photo with her phone, got back in her car and left. The system logged all of it. 14 photos, 1 2-minute video, 5 intercom attempts, 0 access granted. By Wednesday, she had filed another complaint with the sheriff's office. This one alleged that my security system constituted electronic surveillance of a residential neighborhood and violated North Carolina's recording consent laws. The deputy who came out, the same young guy who at this point I was on a first-name basis with, looked at the cameras, confirmed they were pointed at my property and the public road, not at the subdivision, and closed the complaint in 20 minutes. Thursday, Diane sent a letter to every homeowner in Ridgecrest Meadows. I got a copy from Connie Pruitt. The letter described my new gate as a hostile, militarized barrier designed to intimidate our community, and urged homeowners to attend a special meeting where the board would discuss legal options to compel reasonable access. She described the biometric system as surveillance technology being used to monitor Ridgecrest families, and said she was consulting with state-level authorities about my cameras. The special meeting was held the following Tuesday. 44 homeowners attended. Diane stood at the front of the community center with a printed photo of my gate projected on a screen. She called it Fort Knox on our doorstep. She said the biometric system was proof that this man has something to hide. She proposed a special assessment of $8,000 to fund a lawsuit demanding that I provide the HOA with emergency access credentials to my property. The vote was 31 to 13. 13 people asked questions. Connie Pruitt was one of them. She asked Diane directly, "Has our attorney confirmed that we have legal standing to demand access to private property that isn't part of this HOA?" Diane said, "The attorney is working on it." Connie said, "That's not what I asked." Diane moved to the next question. Meanwhile, something was happening that Diane didn't know about. The insurance company had not dropped the matter after their initial warning letter. They had assigned an investigator, a woman named Ruth Chandler, to review the HOA's entire file on the Bain property dispute. Ruth had been quietly pulling records, reviewing meeting minutes, and examining invoices. She discovered that the HOA had spent $14,600 of community funds on the surveyor, Dietrich's legal fees, the maintenance contractor's lock-cutting visits, and the special meeting expenses, all directed at a property that was not part of the HOA and over which the HOA had no legal authority. Ruth Chandler scheduled a meeting with the full HOA board for the last week of August. She didn't tell them what she'd found. She just said it was a routine coverage review. Diane accepted the meeting. She had no idea what was sitting in Ruth Chandler's file. And she had no idea that Detective Tatum's charges were now approved by the DA and that warrants were being prepared. Everything was converging, and Diane was standing right in the center of it, still convinced she was winning. The week before the insurance meeting, Diane made her biggest mistake. She organized what she called a community safety walk, a group event where Ridgecrest homeowners would march along the boundary fence between the subdivision and my property to inspect the impact of the unauthorized security installation on community safety. She promoted it on the HOA Facebook page, the neighborhood email list, and paper flyers posted at the community mailbox cluster. She scheduled it for Saturday morning. She expected 50 people. About 30 showed up. I know because my boundary cameras caught the whole thing. Diane led the group along the split-rail fence, pointing at my cameras, my gate, and my floodlights like a museum docent describing evidence of an alien invasion. She carried a clipboard. She wore a lanyard with an HOA badge on it. She had brought a bullhorn. For the first 40 minutes, the group stayed on the HOA side of the fence. Uncomfortable, but legal. People walk along their own property line. That's their business. Then Diane stepped over the fence. She didn't climb it. The split-rail fence is about 3 feet high in that section, and she simply stepped over a low rail and walked about 10 feet onto my property, still talking through the bullhorn about community rights and access equity. 3 other people followed her. The rest stayed on the Ridgecrest side, looking nervous. My cameras captured everything. 4 individuals, Diane Wexler, and 3 homeowners I later identified as board members Keith Avery, Nicole Pham, and Mike Castellano, crossing the fence line, walking on my property, and approaching one of my camera posts. Diane pointed at the camera and said, "My audio pickup caught it clearly. This is what paranoia looks like. This is what happens when one person decides they're more important than the community." She was standing on my land, trespassing, with 30 witnesses, being recorded from 3 angles, while accusing me of paranoia. I was watching the live feed from my kitchen in Asheville. I didn't call the sheriff this time. I called Helen. She called Detective Tatum. Tatum said the existing warrants for Diane and Furlow were already in process, but the new footage would support additional charges. He asked me to email him the clips that afternoon. What Diane also didn't know was that her community safety walk had been observed by someone else. Cassie Drummond, a reporter from the Asheville Citizen-Times who covered local government and HOA disputes, had seen Diane's Facebook event and driven out to watch. She was parked on County Route 9, about 200 feet away, with a telephoto lens. She photographed the fence crossing, the bullhorn speech, and the group standing on my land. Cassie called me that afternoon to ask for a comment. I told her I'd be happy to speak on the record once the legal process was further along, and I gave her Helen Sharp's contact information. Helen, who understood the value of a well-timed news story, gave Cassie a careful, factual summary of the dispute: the lock cutting, the false complaints, the jurisdictional overreach, the insurance investigation, and the pending charges. Cassie said she was planning a feature piece. On Monday morning, Helen filed a civil complaint against the Ridgecrest Meadows HOA, Diane Wexler personally, Glenn Furlow, and the 3 board members who had crossed the fence. The complaint alleged criminal trespass, tortious interference with property rights, harassment, abuse of process, and conspiracy to deprive property rights. The damages claimed totaled $68,000. covering the security system costs, legal fees, surveying expenses, lost use of property, and emotional distress. The complaint was filed in Buncombe County Superior Court. It was a public record from the moment the clerk stamped it. Ruth Chandler's insurance review meeting was scheduled for Thursday. Detective Tatum's warrants were ready for service. Cassie Drummond's article was being edited. And Diane Wexler had just organized a trespassing event on camera and invited 30 witnesses to watch. The dominoes were lined up, every single one. Thursday arrived like a freight train. The insurance meeting was held at the Ridgecrest Meadows Community Center at 6 p.m. All 5 board members were present. Ruth Chandler came with a colleague and a folder that was nearly 2 inches thick. About 25 homeowners attended, including Connie Pruitt, who later gave me a detailed account of what happened. Ruth opened by thanking the board for their time. Then she stopped smiling. She laid out what her investigation had found. $14,600 in community funds spent on legal actions, surveyor fees, and contractor costs, all directed at a non-member property with no HOA jurisdiction. 2 incidents of criminal trespass by a contracted agent acting on the board president's instructions. 4 unfounded complaints to law enforcement. A surveyor's report that contradicted the certified boundary survey on file with the county. A special assessment vote to fund litigation that the HOA's own attorney had declined to endorse. And a board resolution passed in a closed session that attempted to classify a private road as a shared access corridor, despite no supporting documentation. Ruth said the insurance company was reclassifying the Ridgecrest Meadows HOA to a high-risk account. Premiums would increase by 60% effective January, and the carrier would not cover any legal fees, damages, or judgments arising from the dispute with the Bain property, because the board had been explicitly warned to discontinue these actions and had chosen not to. The room was silent for about 5 seconds. Then it erupted. Homeowners who had voted for the special assessment realized their money had been spent on a losing campaign against a neighbor who wasn't even in their HOA. People who had trusted Diane's assurances about strong legal grounds now understood those grounds were quicksand. Connie Pruitt stood up and read aloud the insurance company's original warning letter, the one Diane had dismissed as overcautious, and asked Diane to explain why she had concealed it from the membership. Diane tried to respond. She was halfway through a sentence about community unity when the community center door opened and Detective Tatum walked in with a uniformed deputy. He identified himself. He said he had warrants. He asked Diane Wexler and Glenn Furlow to step outside. The room went dead quiet, the kind of quiet where you can hear the fluorescent lights buzzing. Diane stood up slowly. Her face had drained of color. Furlow, who was sitting in the back row looking like a man who'd been expecting this, stood up without being asked twice. Tatum served the warrants calmly and professionally. Criminal trespass for both, with accessory charges for Diane related to directing the lock-cutting incidents. He also informed Keith Avery, Nicole Pham, and Mike Castellano that they would be receiving summons related to the Saturday fence crossing incident. As Diane was being escorted out, Connie Pruitt said, loudly enough for the whole room to hear, "Diane, you spent our money trying to get a key to a man's gate. Now you can't even get out of your own mess." Nobody laughed, but a few people nodded. Cassie Drummond's article ran the following morning in the Asheville Citizen-Times under the headline, "HOA President Charged with Trespass After Year-Long Campaign Against Neighbor's Locked Gate." The article included photos of the gate, the boundary fence, and Diane leading the community safety walk with her bullhorn. It quoted Helen Sharp, the fire marshal's clearance, and Ruth Chandler's premium increase. It quoted Diane's Facebook post calling my gate a hostile, militarized barrier. And it quoted the young deputy, anonymously, saying he'd responded to 4 unfounded complaints from the same person in 3 months. The article was shared over 1,100 times in 2 days. The comments section was a symphony of people sharing their own HOA horror stories. Someone created a meme of my gate sign, biometric access only, with the caption, "When Karen can't get a key." I read the article on my cabin porch Saturday morning, with coffee and the smell of mountain laurel coming through the trees. A red-tailed hawk was circling the meadow below the ridge, riding a thermal, patient and precise. I watched it until it banked west and disappeared over the tree line. Then I finished my coffee and went inside to split some wood. The criminal trespass charges against Diane and Furlow were resolved through plea agreements 3 months later. Furlow pleaded to a misdemeanor, received a $500 fine and 6 months probation. His cooperation had been noted. Diane pleaded to 2 counts of misdemeanor trespass and 1 count of directing criminal activity. She received a suspended sentence, 18 months probation, a $1,500 fine, and a court order prohibiting her from contacting me, entering my property, or filing any administrative complaint related to my land. The civil suit settled 5 months after that. The HOA's insurance carrier, which had excluded the dispute from coverage, left the board to negotiate directly. The final settlement was $41,000, $23,000 from the HOA's operating funds, and $18,000 from Diane Wexler personally. The settlement covered my legal fees, the security system costs, the surveying expenses, and a modest damages component. Diane Wexler was removed from the HOA board in a special election the week after the arrests. The vote was 54-2. She put her house on the market in October and moved back to Charlotte before Christmas. I never saw her again. Keith Avery and Nicole Pham resigned from the board voluntarily. Mike Castellano issued a written apology and was allowed to remain. Glenn Furlow sent me a handwritten letter saying he was sorry and that he should have asked more questions before cutting someone's lock on another person's say-so. I appreciated the letter. I told him so. The new HOA board, led by Connie Pruitt, who was elected president unanimously, reached out to me through Helen. Connie came to the cabin on a Saturday afternoon with a plate of brownies and a copy of the new bylaws, which now included a section explicitly stating that the HOA had no jurisdiction over adjacent private properties, and that no board officer could authorize entry onto non-member land under any circumstances. She asked if there was anything the community could do to start fresh. I told her there was one thing. I asked the HOA to install a proper boundary marker, a simple wooden post with a plaque, at the point where the split-rail fence met County Route 9, clearly identifying the property line. Not for me, for the next person, so nobody would ever have to go through this again. They installed it in November. The plaque reads, "Ridgecrest Meadows HOA boundary, adjacent private property beyond this point." I used part of the settlement to upgrade the cabin, new porch boards, a better wood stove, a comfortable reading chair for the corner by the fireplace where Dad used to sit. I also donated $2,000 to the local volunteer fire department, the same department Diane had tried to weaponize against me, for new extraction equipment. The gate still stands, the cameras still run, the sign still says biometric access only. But most days, the only visitors my system logs are deer, a family of wild turkeys, and the occasional black bear that walks up to the camera, sniffs it, and wanders off. And on Friday evenings, I still drive up that gravel road, open the gate with my fingerprint, park under the oaks, and sit on the porch where my father sat. The ridge turns purple, the creek ticks over the rocks, the lightning bugs come out, and not a single person on earth has a key to my front door, except me. That's the way Dad would have wanted it. So if your HOA has ever demanded access to something that was never theirs to begin with, if they've ever treated your property line like a suggestion, if they've ever confused their clipboard with a badge, tell me about it in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you're not subscribed yet, now's the time, because next week I've got a story about the HOA president who fined a 90-year-old veteran for the color of his front door.